"You don't belong in this line, sweetheart." The words echoed across Eagle Point Mess Hall like a rifle crack. Hundreds of Marines turned to look. A woman in a blue athletic shirt stood alone beside the serving line. Sweat darkened the fabric around her shoulders. Dust still clung to her hiking boots from a 10-mile ruck march around Falcon Ridge Marine Base. She looked tired. She looked hungry. She looked completely ordinary. That was exactly why Staff Sergeant Bryce Holloway thought he could humiliate her. The shove came without warning. His shoulder slammed into hers. Her tray flew from her hands. Plastic struck the floor with a sharp crack. Salad exploded across the polished tile. The room fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Marines sitting at nearby tables lowered their eyes. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked afraid. Everyone knew Bryce Holloway. Everyone knew his temper. The woman slowly looked down at the food, scattered around her feet. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react. The expression on her face wasn't anger. It was something far older, something that made a few Marines suddenly uneasy. Bryce folded his arms and smirked. "This chow hall is for warriors," he announced loudly. "You can wait until real Marines eat." A few nervous laughs escaped from his friends. The woman raised her eyes, cold blue eyes. Eyes that watched helicopters land under enemy fire. Eyes that had seen Marines die. Eyes that had carried secrets most men would never understand. "Is that so?" she asked quietly. Bryce stepped closer. "That's exactly so." The room held its breath. Nobody knew that the woman standing in front of him had commanded Marines in combat. Nobody knew she had earned medals Bryce could only dream about. Nobody knew she would officially assume command of Falcon Ridge Marine Base the following morning. Nobody knew she outranked every single person in the building, including the officers, including the battalion commander, including the entire chain of command. Her name was Major General Eleanor Whitaker, and before this day ended, one Marine's life would change forever. Because leadership isn't revealed when people salute you. Leadership is revealed when they think they don't have to. The morning had begun before sunrise. A cold wind swept across Falcon Ridge Marine Base as Eleanor Whitaker adjusted the straps of her rucksack and started down Iron Horse Perimeter Trail. No staff car followed her. No security detail accompanied her. No aides carried radios behind her. That was intentional. In less than 24 hours, she would become the commanding general of the installation. Before accepting that responsibility, she wanted to see the base with her own eyes. The real base. Not the polished version shown during briefings. 10 miles later, sweat soaked through her shirt. Her shoulders ached. Her knees reminded her she was no longer 30 years old, but she kept moving. The trail curved along training fields where young Marines were already beginning their day. Some recognized her, most didn't. She preferred it that way. About half a mile from the finish point, she noticed a Marine sitting on the ground beside the trail. The young Lance Corporal looked pale. His breathing was ragged. His hands trembled. Eleanor immediately changed direction. "You all right, Marine?" The young man tried to stand. Failed. "Just dehydrated, ma'am." "Sit." The command left her mouth before she thought about it. The Marine obeyed instantly. Old habits. She handed him her spare water bottle. "Drink." He hesitated. "Ma'am, that's yours." "Drink." He drank. Slowly. Carefully. After several minutes, color returned to his face. "Thank you." Eleanor smiled. "Take care of yourself. The Corps invested too much money in you to lose you to something this stupid." The young Marine laughed weakly. For the first time all morning, she smiled too. Then she continued toward Eagle Point Mess Hall. She was hungry, exhausted, ready for nothing more complicated than a quiet lunch. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. As she entered the crowded Chow Hall, Staff Sergeant Bryce Holloway noticed her immediately. His eyes narrowed. He saw civilian clothes. He saw no rank. He saw no authority. Most importantly, he saw someone he believed he could control. And Bryce Holloway loved controlling people. The moment their eyes met, Eleanor felt it. The arrogance. The hostility. The need to dominate. She had seen men like him before, in every war, in every command, in every generation. The only question was how far he would go. Within seconds, she would have her answer. The answer came faster than Eleanor expected. Bryce Holloway stepped directly into her path. The serving line stretched behind him. Marines moved slowly with trays in their hands, but the moment Bryce planted himself in front of the woman in blue, the entire line seemed to freeze. He looked her up and down. Not once, twice. The inspection wasn't curiosity, it was judgment. "Dependents eat after the working parties," he said loudly. Eleanor remained calm. "I wasn't aware that was base policy." A few Marines nearby immediately looked away. The response had been polite, too polite. Men like Bryce hated calm people. They couldn't control them. Bryce smirked. "Then now you're aware." Eleanor glanced toward the serving counter. "I don't see that written anywhere." The smirk vanished. A dangerous look replaced it. "You got a problem following instructions?" "No." "Then move." "No." The single word landed like a stone in water. Silence spread outward. Every conversation within 20 feet stopped. Bryce's face reddened. He wasn't accustomed to resistance, especially not from someone he viewed as powerless. "Excuse me?" Eleanor met his eyes. "I said no." Several Marines exchanged nervous glances. One lance corporal quietly muttered, "Oh no." The situation had just crossed a line. Bryce took a step forward. "So you're refusing a direct order?" Eleanor's expression never changed. "You don't have authority to issue that order." The words struck harder than a slap. Gasps sounded from nearby tables. Bryce laughed, but there was no humor in it, only wounded pride. "You hear that?" He shouted toward the room. "She thinks she knows authority." Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to. Bryce's eyes swept across the crowd, his audience, his stage. His ego demanded a performance. Without warning, he grabbed another tray from the stack beside him. The movement was aggressive, violent. The tray slammed into Eleanor's hands. The force knocked it sideways. Plastic crashed against the floor. The sound echoed through the chow hall. Several Marines flinched. Bryce pointed toward the scattered pieces. "Oops." His friends laughed. The laughter felt forced, uneasy. Even they sensed something wasn't right. Eleanor looked down at the broken tray. Lettuce. Tomatoes. A bread roll. All scattered across the polished floor. For a brief moment, she simply stared. Not because she cared about the food, because the image triggered something older, a memory. A battlefield. A young Marine eating lunch beside a damaged vehicle, laughing. Talking about going home. 30 seconds later, an explosion had taken him apart. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, but the ache remained. Eleanor slowly knelt, not to clean the floor, to pick up the bread roll. A strange expression crossed Bryce's face. Triumph. As though forcing someone to kneel somehow made him stronger. He leaned down, close enough for only a few nearby Marines to hear. "That's right." His voice dripped with contempt. "Know your place." Several Marines lowered their heads. The words made them uncomfortable. Not because they were shocking, because they were familiar. Too familiar. Bryce treated junior Marines exactly the same way. Every day. Eleanor rose slowly, still holding the bread roll. Still calm. Still completely in control. That calmness frightened people far more than anger would have. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, "do you enjoy this?" Bryce blinked. "What?" "This." She gestured around the room. The humiliation. The silence became unbearable. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For the first time, uncertainty flickered behind Bryce's eyes, only for a second. Then pride returned. "This chow hall is for warriors." He folded his arms. "You don't belong here." The words hung in the air. Eleanor studied him carefully, as if memorizing every detail, every flaw, every insecurity hidden beneath the uniform. Then she spoke, softly, calmly, with a weight that none of the Marines understood. "You keep using that word." Bryce frowned. "What word?" "Warrior." Something in her voice suddenly felt different, older, harder, more dangerous. The room seemed to grow colder, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Bryce Holloway felt the first hint of fear. Far away, buried beneath years of discipline and painful memories, a battlefield was beginning to awaken inside Eleanor Whitaker, and soon everyone in Eagle Point Mess Hall would learn exactly what a real warrior looked like. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The crowded mess hall had become strangely silent. Even the clatter of silverware seemed distant. Bryce Holloway stood with his arms folded, waiting for the woman in front of him to break, to cry, to argue, to leave. That was how these confrontations usually ended. People submitted. People always submitted. But Major General Eleanor Whitaker wasn't thinking about Bryce anymore. She was thinking about a battlefield thousands of miles away. The word still echoed in her head. Warrior. The fluorescent lights above Eagle Point Mess Hall faded. The smell of food disappeared. Suddenly, she was standing beneath a blazing Iraqi sun. Al-Qara district. 15 years earlier. Dust filled the air. Smoke rolled between shattered buildings. Gunfire cracked across narrow streets. A young Marine lay bleeding beside a damaged Humvee. "Ma'am!" The corpsman's voice trembled. "We need a bird now!" Eleanor remembered grabbing the radio, remembered blood covering her gloves, remembered the wounded Marine reaching for her sleeve. He couldn't have been older than 19. Am I going home? The question had nearly broken her. Not because she didn't know the answer, because she did. The helicopter arrived 22 minutes later. The young Marine died before it landed. Eleanor still remembered his name, still remembered writing the letter to his mother, still remembered standing beside the coffin. Warriors. Real warriors. Not men who bullied people in chow halls. Not men who confused fear with respect. The memory shifted. Another battlefield. Another war. This time, Afghanistan. Red Valley Outpost. The mountains glowed orange beneath the setting sun. Enemy fire erupted without warning. Marines dove for cover. The radio exploded with frantic voices. And through the chaos, Eleanor saw someone she loved. Colonel Gabriel Whitaker, her husband. Her best friend. The man who had taught her how to laugh again after years of war. He turned toward her, just for a moment. Long enough to smile. Then the explosion came. The memory hit as sharply as it always did, even after all these years. Even after all the medals. Even after all the promotions. Some wounds never healed. The black memorial bracelet on her wrist suddenly felt heavier. Her thumb brushed across the worn metal. Gabriel Whitaker. K-I-A. The engraving had nearly faded from years of use. She wore it every day. Not because she wanted to remember, because she was terrified of forgetting. Back in the present, Bryce noticed her glance downward. He mistook the moment entirely. He thought he was winning. "You finally figured it out?" His voice dripped with arrogance. Eleanor slowly raised her eyes. The coldness in them made several nearby Marines shift uncomfortably. Something had changed. The calm remained. But now, there was something underneath it. Something powerful. Something dangerous. "Figured what out?" she asked. "That you don't belong here." A young private standing nearby winced. The words sounded worse every time Bryce spoke them. Eleanor studied him. Not with anger, not with hatred, almost with sadness. She had spent 20 years leading Marines. She had watched young men become heroes. She had watched others destroy themselves through pride. Bryce reminded her of the second group. "You know," she said quietly, "the strongest Marines I ever served with rarely talked about being warriors." Bryce laughed. "Good for them. The real ones didn't need to." The words landed harder than she intended. Several Marines nearby exchanged glances. Bryce's smile faded. His ego couldn't tolerate being challenged, especially in front of an audience. He stepped closer, close enough that Eleanor could smell coffee on his breath. "Listen carefully." His voice dropped. "You have exactly 30 seconds to leave my chow hall." Eleanor didn't blink. "Your chow hall?" Bryce leaned forward. "That's right." For the first time, Eleanor's expression hardened. The warmth disappeared completely. What remained was the face that had commanded Marines under enemy fire. The face that had faced death more times than Bryce could imagine. When she spoke, her voice became ice. "If you touch me again, Staff Sergeant Holloway." She paused. The silence stretched. Every Marine in the room listened. Every eye locked onto them. Then Eleanor finished the sentence. "And I sincerely hope you don't." Her blue eyes never left his. "The consequences will be severe." Across the room, Lance Corporal Noah Mercer suddenly froze, because at that exact moment, he finally recognized her. Lance Corporal Noah Mercer felt his stomach drop. 1 second he was staring at the confrontation. The next he felt as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. "No way," he whispered. Across the table, Private First Class Caleb Rowan looked up from his food. "What?" Noah didn't answer. His eyes remained locked on the woman standing in front of Bryce Holloway. The blue athletic shirt, the dusty boots, the blonde hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Those details had fooled everyone else, but now Noah saw what mattered: the posture, the confidence, the stillness, and most importantly, the bracelet. His eyes narrowed. The black memorial bracelet on her wrist looked familiar. Very familiar. He had seen it before. Not in person. In a photograph. 3 days earlier. During the incoming command briefing, Noah's heart began hammering. The briefing room flashed through his memory. A giant projector screen. Slides introducing senior leadership. Names. Ranks. Combat records. Awards. Then, one photograph. A woman. Standing in service uniform, blue eyes, calm expression. A black bracelet on her wrist. The exact same bracelet. Oh my God, Noah whispered. Caleb frowned. What are you talking about? Noah pointed. The bracelet. Caleb squinted. So? That's her. Who's her? Noah looked at him as if he'd gone insane. The new commanding general. Caleb laughed, then stopped. Because Noah wasn't laughing. You serious? Noah swallowed. I think that's Major General Eleanor Whitaker. For several seconds, neither Marine spoke. Then Caleb looked back toward the serving line. His face slowly turned pale. No. Yes. No way. Yes way. Caleb's eyes widened. Bryce is dead. Not dead. Noah stood abruptly, career dead. His chair nearly tipped over. Nearby Marines glanced toward him. Nobody understood why he suddenly looked terrified. Across the chow hall, Bryce continued talking, continued posturing, continued digging his own grave. Every word made Noah more nervous. Why isn't she saying who she is? Caleb asked. Noah shook his head. Because she shouldn't have to. The answer hit both of them immediately. Rank wasn't the issue. That was the point. Bryce wasn't treating her badly because she was a general. He was treating her badly because he thought she wasn't, and somehow that made the situation worse. Much worse. Noah looked toward the nearest exit, then back toward Eleanor, then back toward the exit. His decision was made. I have to go. What? I have to call somebody. Caleb grabbed his sleeve. Are you serious? Noah leaned closer. Listen to me. His voice dropped. If that's General Whitaker, and I think it is, then Bryce is about 30 seconds away from the biggest mistake of his life. Caleb looked back toward the serving line. Bryce had stepped even closer. The distance between him and Eleanor had almost disappeared. Oh. Yeah. Oh. Exactly. Noah didn't waste another second. He grabbed his cover and sprinted toward the doors. The sudden movement attracted attention. Several Marines turned to watch him leave, but Noah didn't care. The bright afternoon sunlight nearly blinded him as he burst outside. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. For a moment, he struggled to dial, not because he didn't know the number, because he knew exactly what was at stake. Finally, the call connected. Sentinel Battalion Headquarters, staff duty. Noah took a breath. Sir, this is Lance Corporal Noah Mercer. What can I do for you, Marine? Noah glanced back through the chow hall windows. Bryce was still standing there, still talking, still completely unaware. Sir? Noah said carefully. I believe Major General Eleanor Whitaker is currently inside Eagle Point Mess Hall. A pause. So? Noah's throat tightened. Staff Sergeant Bryce Holloway's publicly humiliating her. Silence. Then another pause, longer this time. Finally, the voice returned. Say that again. Noah looked through the glass. At that exact moment, Bryce pointed directly into Eleanor's face. The sight made Noah wince. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Sir, Staff Sergeant Holloway is attacking the incoming commanding general. On the other end of the line, everything suddenly went very quiet, and Noah knew the storm was coming. Inside Eagle Point Mess Hall, the tension had become almost unbearable. Nobody was eating anymore. Forks rested motionless on trays. Conversations had died. Every Marine in the room knew something was wrong. They just didn't know how wrong. Staff Sergeant Bryce Holloway, however, remained completely oblivious. His entire attention was focused on the woman standing in front of him. The woman who refused to be intimidated. The woman who refused to leave. The woman who somehow made him feel smaller every time she spoke. And Bryce hated that feeling. His pride couldn't tolerate it. His ego demanded victory. You think you're tough? He asked. Owenna said nothing. You think standing there makes some kind of point? Still nothing. The silence was driving him insane. Bryce took another step closer. The distance between them had become dangerously small. Several Marines shifted nervously. One young private quietly whispered a prayer. Another Marine muttered, "Please stop talking, Staff Sergeant." Bryce didn't hear him, or perhaps he simply didn't care. "Last chance," Bryce snapped. "Leave." Eleanor met his gaze. "No." The answer landed like a hammer. Bryce's face turned crimson. Enough. He was finished being embarrassed. Finished being challenged. Finished being ignored. He spun toward the two corporals standing nearby. "Corporal Briggs, Corporal Pierce." The two Marines immediately straightened. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Remove her." Neither Marine moved. For a second, they simply stared. Both had witnessed the entire confrontation. Both knew something felt wrong. "Staff Sergeant," Briggs began carefully. "Maybe we should just let her get Chow." Bryce rounded on him. The fury in his face was immediate. Was that a suggestion? "No, Staff Sergeant." "Then follow the order." Neither corporal moved. The hesitation only made Bryce angrier. His authority was slipping, and everyone could see it. Eleanor looked at the two young Marines. Unlike Bryce, they still had a chance to learn. Still had a chance to become leaders. "Corporal?" she said calmly. Both men looked at her. "Do not touch me." The words were quiet, yet somehow they carried through the entire room. "You are being given an unlawful order." The statement hit like a grenade. Gasps spread across nearby tables. Briggs looked stunned. Pierce looked terrified. Bryce exploded. "Unlawful?" He laughed harshly. "You don't get to decide what's lawful." "No," Eleanor replied, "but experience does." The answer made several Marines look at her more carefully. There was something unusual about her confidence, something impossible to ignore. For the briefest moment, uncertainty flickered across Bryce's face. Then pride crushed it. His ego had carried him too far to stop now. "Fine." He turned toward the corporals. "I'll handle it myself." Several Marines stood from their chairs. Instinct. Not to help. To get out of the way. The atmosphere had changed. Everyone could feel it. Something irreversible was about to happen. Bryce stepped forward. Fast. Aggressive. His hand shot out and wrapped around Eleanor Whitaker's upper arm. The grip was hard, designed to control, designed to humiliate. A collective gasp filled the chow hall. The moment his hand touched her, time seemed to slow. Eleanor looked down at his fingers, then back at his face. Her expression didn't change. Not anger, not fear, not surprise, only disappointment. The kind a teacher might feel toward a student who had ignored every warning. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. Bryce smirked. "What are you going to do about it?" The answer came instantly. Eleanor moved. Not violently, not dramatically, just efficiently. A small shift of her body, a precise rotation of her wrist, a movement practiced thousands of times over decades. Suddenly Bryce's grip broke. His balance disappeared. Pain shot through his arm. Before he understood what had happened, he stumbled backward, hard. His shoulder slammed into a table. Trays rattled. Drinks spilled. The entire chow hall froze. Absolute silence. Bryce stared at his own hand, then at Eleanor, then back at his hand. His face went pale. For the first time since the confrontation began, he looked afraid. And outside the building, vehicles from battalion headquarters were already racing toward Eagle Point Mess Hall. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The entire mess hall stared at Staff Sergeant Bryce Holloway, and Bryce stared back. Not at the Marines, not at the corporals, at Eleanor Whitaker. Confusion washed across his face, then embarrassment, then rage. Pure, uncontrolled rage. The pain in his wrist wasn't severe. The damage to his pride was. In front of hundreds of Marines, a woman he believed was a civilian had just broken his grip without effort, without struggle, without even changing her expression. His humiliation was complete, and Bryce couldn't accept it. "You assaulted me!" The shout exploded through the chow hall. Several Marines winced. Others exchanged worried glances. Eleanor remained perfectly still. "No." Her voice was calm. "You grabbed me. You attacked a staff sergeant." "I removed your hand." The distinction only made Bryce angrier. His breathing had become uneven. His face was nearly purple. For the first time in years, He wasn't in control of the situation, and he desperately needed control. He pointed at Eleanor. You think you're special? Silence. You think you're better than everybody else? More silence. The calmness was suffocating him. Bryce turned toward Corporals Ethan Briggs and Logan Pierce. Detain her. Neither Marine moved. The order hung in the air. Ignored. Did you hear me? Briggs swallowed. Staff Sergeant, that's an order! Pierce looked trapped. Everything inside him screamed that this was wrong, but refusing a direct order from a staff sergeant wasn't a small thing. Careers could be damaged, reputations destroyed. Bryce saw their hesitation and took a step closer. You two want to explain to the first sergeant why you refused a lawful order. That did it. The corporals exchanged one final glance. Neither wanted to do this, but both began moving, slowly, reluctantly, toward Eleanor. Around the room, Marines rose from their seats. Nobody spoke. Nobody intervened. But every eye followed what was happening. Eleanor looked at the two corporals. She saw fear. Not hostility. Not arrogance. Fear. They weren't bad Marines, just young ones. Last warning, she said quietly. Stand down. Briggs hesitated. Pierce hesitated. Bryce exploded. Grab her! The moment shattered. The corporals moved, not aggressively, not violently, just enough to comply. One reached toward Eleanor's shoulder. The other moved toward her opposite side. What happened next lasted less than 3 seconds. Years later, many Marines would still talk about it. Not because it was flashy, because it was flawless. Eleanor pivoted. One step. One movement. Nothing wasted. The first corporal's hand never reached her shoulder. She redirected the arm harmlessly away from her body. The second corporal lost his balance before he even realized what had happened. A controlled shift of leverage. A simple adjustment of momentum. No punches. No strikes. No violence. Just precision. The kind that only came from decades of training. Within seconds, both corporals found themselves immobilized, uninjured, unhurt. Completely unable to continue. The mess hall fell into stunned silence. Several Marines actually stood up from their chairs. One private dropped his drink. The cup hit the floor. Nobody noticed. Every eye was fixed on Eleanor. Even Briggs and Pierce looked shocked. Not by pain, by how easy it had been. Eleanor immediately released them. The moment they regained their balance, she stepped back, giving them space, giving them dignity. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. The corporals moved away immediately. Neither attempted to engage again. Bryce Bless couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. His entire worldview was collapsing. Nothing made sense anymore. Who was this woman? How was she doing this? Why wasn't she afraid? Then panic finally replaced anger. Bryce grabbed the radio clipped to his belt. His hands were shaking. Military police, respond immediately! His voice cracked. We have a hostile subject resisting detention inside Eagle Point Mess Hall. The transmission echoed across the room. A collective sense of dread settled over the Marines. Everyone knew things had gone too far. Much too far. Eleanor looked at Bryce, not with anger, not with triumph, almost with pity. And somehow that expression hurt more than anything else. Outside, engines roared, doors slammed, boots hit pavement. The response Bryce had requested was coming, but it wasn't the response he expected, because at that very moment, a convoy from Sentinel Battalion headquarters was pulling into the parking lot, and at the front of that convoy sat Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Cross. Beside him sat Sergeant Major Warren Blackwell. Both men wore the same expression: absolute fury. The reckoning had arrived. The first sign was the sound of tires. Even inside Eagle Point Mess Hall, Marines near the windows heard vehicles braking hard outside. Then came the sound of doors slamming. 1, 2, 5. More. Heavy boots struck pavement in rapid succession. The noise moved toward the building with alarming speed. Inside the Chow hall, a strange tension settled over the room. Every Marine could feel it. Something was coming. Something big. Staff Sergeant Bryce Holloway, however, felt something entirely different. Relief. At last, finally, help was here. He gripped his radio tightly and pointed toward Eleanor. You heard that transmission. His voice had regained some confidence. MPS are on the way. Eleanor said nothing. The silence irritated him. It always did. You're finished. Still nothing. You should have left when I gave you the chance. No response. Bryce forced a smile, but it looked weak now, uncertain. Because despite everything that had happened, the woman standing before him remained completely calm. Not nervous, not defensive, not concerned. The expression on her face was the same expression she had worn from the beginning, as if she already knew how this story would end. That realization unsettled him. Across the room, Lance Corporal Noah Mercer stood near the entrance. His pulse hammered in his ears. He had received only one response from battalion headquarters before the call disconnected. Stay where you are. We're coming. The words replayed in his head. Then it happened. The front doors exploded open. The sound echoed through the Chow hall like a gunshot. Every Marine turned. Conversations that had briefly resumed died instantly. Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Cross entered first. He wasn't walking. He was moving with purpose, fast. Behind him came Sergeant Major Warren Blackwell, then Master Gunnery Sergeant Victor Hale. 3 additional officers followed close behind. Every face carried the same expression: urgency, concern, and beneath both, anger. The entire room snapped to attention. Chairs scraped backward. Boots slammed together. Marines rose instinctively. Nobody had to be told. The arrival of that much senior leadership could only mean one thing. Something serious had happened. Very serious. Bryce's confidence immediately returned. He straightened his uniform, lifted his chin, and stepped forward. Perfect. The battalion leadership had arrived. Now someone would finally listen. "Sir!" Bryce called loudly. His voice carried through the room. "Thank God you're here." Lieutenant Colonel Cross didn't respond. Bryce continued anyway. This civilian became aggressive and resisted detention. Still nothing. The colonel kept walking. "Sir, she assaulted 2 Marines and—" Nothing. Not even a glance. The colonel moved directly past him, as if Bryce didn't exist. The smile disappeared from Bryce's face. Confusion replaced it. "Sir?" No answer. Sergeant Major Blackwell passed next. The massive Marine slowed slightly. For a moment, Bryce felt relieved. Finally, someone was going to acknowledge him. Instead, the Sergeant Major stopped only long enough to look directly into his eyes. The expression there sent a chill down Bryce's spine. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, the kind reserved for people who had disgraced themselves. "Don't say another word." The Sergeant Major's voice was dangerously quiet. Bryce blinked. "What?" "I said, don't say another word." Every Marine within earshot froze. Nobody had ever heard the Sergeant Major sound like that. The warning wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Bryce's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time all day, he obeyed. The leadership group continued forward, straight toward Eleanor Whitaker. No hesitation. No uncertainty. No discussion. Across the Chow hall, Noah Mercer closed his eyes briefly. It's happening. Finally. It's happening. Hundreds of Marines watched as Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Cross stopped precisely 3 feet in front of the woman in the blue athletic shirt. The room became so quiet that people could hear the humming lights overhead. No one moved. No one breathed. Even Bryce seemed frozen. The colonel squared his shoulders. His face became unreadable. And then, to the complete shock of everyone in Eagle Point Mess Hall, he snapped to attention. The moment stretched. A heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. Then his right hand began to rise. And Bryce Holloway suddenly realized something was terribly wrong. The entire mess hall seemed to stop breathing. Lieutenant Colonel Nathaniel Cross stood rigidly in front of the woman everyone had spent the last 20 minutes watching. The woman Bryce Holloway had insulted, threatened, grabbed, attempted to remove. The woman Bryce had called a civilian. The colonel's right hand rose sharply, then snapped to his brow. A perfect salute. The sound of several Marines gasping echoed through the room. For one impossible second, nobody understood what they were seeing. Not the privates, not the corporals, not even Bryce. Then Sergeant Major Warren Blackwell stepped forward. His hand rose. Another salute. Master Gunnery Sergeant Victor Hale followed, then the 3 officers behind them, one after another. Salute. 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 The room fell into absolute silence. Every Marine present stared in disbelief. Across the Chow Hall, Noah Mercer slowly exhaled. He had known, but even he wasn't prepared for the reality of seeing it happen. The entire senior leadership team was saluting a woman in a blue workout shirt and dusty hiking boots. A woman standing beside a pile of spilled food. A woman Bryce Holloway had tried to throw out of the building. The realization spread through the room like wildfire. Faces went pale. Eyes widened. Several Marines looked physically ill, and no one looked worse than Bryce. The blood drained from his face so quickly it was almost frightening. He stared at the salutes, then at Eleanor, then back at the salutes. His brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Number. Impossible. There had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Lieutenant Colonel Cross held the salute. His voice rang clearly through the silent Chow Hall. "Good afternoon, General Whitaker." The words hit Bryce like a rifle round. General. The title echoed inside his head. General. Not Colonel. Not Major. Not Captain. General. The highest-ranking officer he had ever spoken to in his life, and he had spent the last half hour humiliating her in front of the entire base. The room remained frozen. Every Marine now understood. The incoming commanding general, the woman from the briefing photographs, the combat commander everyone had heard about, the decorated leader who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, the officer scheduled to assume command of Falcon Ridge Marine Base the next morning. She had been standing in the Chow line all along. Eleanor Whitaker slowly raised her hand. Her return salute was effortless, natural. The movement of someone who had done it tens of thousands of times. "Good afternoon, Colonel." Her voice remained calm, professional, completely unchanged, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The contrast made the moment even more devastating. Lieutenant Colonel Cross lowered his salute. "General, my sincerest apologies." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "For what?" The colonel looked visibly uncomfortable. "For the conduct you have been subjected to." A painful silence followed. Everyone knew exactly who he meant. Bryce wanted the floor to open beneath him, wanted to disappear, wanted to wake up and discover this had all been a nightmare. Instead, Eleanor glanced toward him. Just one glance. That was all it took. Bryce felt his stomach drop. Not because she looked angry, because she didn't. There was no rage in her eyes, no hatred. No desire for revenge, only disappointment, and somehow that was far worse. "Colonel," Eleanor said quietly, "I wasn't conducting an inspection." "No, ma'am. I wasn't testing anyone." "No, ma'am. I was trying to get lunch." Several Marines lowered their heads. The simplicity of the statement made the entire situation even more humiliating. Elena turned toward the crowd. Her gaze moved across the room, across the Marines, across the spilled food, across the shattered pride of one staff sergeant. Then her eyes settled on Bryce Holloway. For the first time since the confrontation began, fear completely replaced arrogance on his face. His lips trembled. "General," the word barely escaped. Eleanor took a single step toward him. Nothing dramatic, nothing threatening. Yet Bryce instinctively stepped back. The movement did not go unnoticed. Neither did the tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Staff Sergeant Holloway," Eleanor said calmly. "Yes, ma'am." His voice cracked. The room held its breath. Everyone expected fury. Everyone expected destruction. Everyone expected a career-ending explosion. Instead, Eleanor asked a single question, a question that struck harder than any punishment. "If I wasn't a general today," she paused. The silence became unbearable. Then she finished. "How would you have treated me?" Bryce burnt, and neither could anyone else. No one answered. Not Bryce Holloway. Not the officers. Not the Marines, standing at attention throughout Eagle Point Mess Hall. The question lingered in the air. Simple. Devastating. "If I wasn't a general today, how would you have treated me?" Bryce lowered his eyes. For the first time since the confrontation began, he had nowhere left to hide. No authority. No excuses. No rank. Only the truth. And the truth was ugly. The silence stretched. Finally, Bryce swallowed hard. His voice barely worked. The words died in his throat, because there was no answer he could give that wouldn't condemn him. Eleanor watched him quietly. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. She was forcing him to confront himself. There was a difference. A very important difference. The entire Chow Hall remained motionless. Every Marine understood they were witnessing something bigger than discipline. They were witnessing leadership. Real leadership. The kind that could not be taught in classrooms. The kind learned through painful moments. Bryce finally lifted his eyes. They were red. Humiliation had replaced arrogance. General. His voice cracked. I was wrong. No one moved. No one spoke. Eleanor nodded slightly. Yes. The single word carried no anger, only honesty. Bryce felt worse. He almost wished she would yell. Punishment would have been easier. This was harder. Much harder. Do you know why? Eleanor asked. Bryce opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. No, ma'am. Eleanor glanced around the room, at the Marines watching, at the officers, at the young corporals, at Noah Mercer, standing quietly near the wall. Then she spoke. Because this was never about rank, the room listened. You didn't know I was a general? No, ma'am. You thought I was a civilian? Yes, ma'am. And because you thought I had no power, you believed you could treat me however you wanted. The words landed like hammer blows. Bryce Christ couldn't deny any of them. They were true. Every word. Eleanor took another step closer. Not threatening, not aggressive, just close enough to make sure he heard every syllable. Leadership is revealed by how you treat people who cannot help your career. Silence. Leadership is revealed by how you treat people who cannot punish you. More silence. Leadership is revealed by how you treat people who appear powerless. Several Marines lowered their eyes. The lesson wasn't only for Bryce anymore. It was for everyone, including themselves. Eleanor looked toward the far end of the Chow Hall. For a moment, her expression softened. A distant memory crossed her face. There was a corporal once. The room remained silent. His name was Travis Keegan. Several officers recognized the name immediately. Eleanor continued. Red Valley Outpost, Afghanistan. The room became even quieter. Travis thought leadership meant making people fear him. Bryce's stomach tightened. The story felt familiar already. He humiliated junior Marines. She paused. He abused authority. Another pause. He believed rank made him important. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Bryce felt every eye in the room shift toward him. Then Eleanor's voice became softer, more personal. One day we were ambushed. The memory seemed to pull her far away. Enemy fire came from 3 directions. No one interrupted. No one dared. Travis froze. The words hit hard. He stopped functioning. Eleanor's eyes moved slowly across the room. The Marines he had bullied carried him to safety. Silence. They saved his life. She paused. Not because he deserved it. Another pause. Because they were Marines. The words settled over the room like a blanket. Heavy. Unavoidable. Bryce felt his throat tighten. For the first time all day, he truly understood. Not what he had done, why he had done it. And that realization hurt far more. Eleanor finally looked directly at him again. Character matters more than rank, Staff Sergeant. Yes, ma'am. Always. Yes, ma'am. Tears filled Bryce's eyes. He didn't wipe them away. Didn't try to hide them. Because there was no hiding left. The entire room expected the next words to be devastating. Career-ending. Merciless. Even Lieutenant Colonel Cross braced himself. Instead, Eleanor turned toward Sergeant Major Warren Blackwell. The Sergeant Major immediately snapped to attention. Yes, General. Eleanor's answer surprised everyone, including Bryce. I'm not interested in destroying this Marine. The room froze. Bryce stared at her in disbelief. Eleanor continued. I'm interested in correcting him. And suddenly, the future Bryce expected disappeared completely. The room remained silent. Even after General Eleanor Whitaker spoke, nobody seemed to know how to react. I'm not interested in destroying this Marine. The words echoed through Eagle Point Mess Hall. Bryce Holloway stared at her. Disbelief flooded his face. He had expected annihilation, an investigation, a public firing. The end of his career. Instead, the most powerful officer on the installation had offered him something he did not deserve. A second chance. Sergeant Major Warren Blackwell nodded. Yes, General. Eleanor turned toward Bryce. Her expression remained calm. Staff Sergeant Holloway. Yes, ma'am. For the next 3 weeks, you will report directly to mess duty operations. A murmur swept through the room. Bryce blinked. Mess duty? You will clean this facility. Yes, ma'am. You will wash every pot. Yes, ma'am. You will serve every Marine who walks through these doors. Yes, ma'am. You will learn that service is not beneath leadership. Bryce swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor gave a slight nod. Good. Then she looked around the Chow hall, at the Marines, the corporals, the officers, everyone. Dismiss. The spell broke. The room finally breathed again. Conversation slowly returned. Marines exchanged stunned looks. Nobody would ever forget what they had witnessed, and neither would Bryce Holloway. 3 weeks later, the heat inside Granite Scullery was unbearable. Steam filled the air. Soap covered Bryce's hands. His shoulders ached. His back hurt. His pride had been scrubbed raw. For 21 days he had washed pots, scrubbed trays, mopped floors, served food. For 21 days he had looked into the eyes of young Marines and realized how often he had failed them. The experience changed him. Not overnight. Not easily. But genuinely. For the first time in years, he began listening more than talking, learning more than commanding, serving more than demanding. The transformation was gradual, but it was real. Then one afternoon, a familiar figure entered Eagle Point Mess Hall. The room immediately straightened. Major General Eleanor Whitaker. This time she wore her uniform. 2 stars gleamed on her collar. The entire room felt her presence, but she walked as she always had, without arrogance, without ceremony, without demanding attention. Bryce stood behind the serving line, holding a large spoon of mashed potatoes. The moment he saw her, he stiffened. Not from fear, from respect. Good afternoon, General. Eleanor stopped in front of him. Good afternoon, Staff Sergeant. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor glanced toward the serving line. How are the pots? A faint smile appeared on Bryce's face. The first genuine smile many Marines had ever seen from him. Cleaner than they've ever been, ma'am. A few nearby Marines laughed quietly. Even Eleanor smiled. Good. Then her expression became thoughtful. Have you learned anything? Bryce looked around the mess hall. At the Marines, eating lunch. At the young private cleaning tables. At the corporal helping another Marine carry trays. Then he nodded. Yes, ma'am. What? Bryce answered honestly. That leadership isn't about being the most important person in the room. Eleanor remained silent, waiting. Bryce continued. It's about taking care of the people in the room. For the first time since arriving, Eleanor looked genuinely pleased. Well said. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small object, and placed it on the serving counter. A worn challenge coin. Old. Scratched. Clearly carried through years of deployments. Bryce stared at it. General? Keep it. His eyes widened. I don't deserve this. No. Eleanor smiled slightly. You don't. Several nearby Marines chuckled. Even Bryce laughed. The tension disappeared. Then Eleanor's voice softened. This isn't a reward. Bryce looked down at the coin. What is it? A reminder. He looked back up. Eleanor's blue eyes met his. A reminder that rank can be taken away. Silence. A reminder that respect must be earned. More silence. A reminder that every Marine deserves dignity. Bryce nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor picked up her tray, then paused. One more thing. Yes, General? She glanced toward a nervous young private standing at the end of the serving line. The Marine looked terrified, unsure, awkward. The same way many young Marines looked. Eleanor nodded toward him. What does he want? Bryce looked at the private, then smiled. A real smile. Not the cruel smirk he once wore. Potatoes or rice, Marine? Potatoes, Staff Sergeant. Bryce gave him an extra scoop. Good choice. The young Marine grinned. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. As Eleanor walked away, she looked back once. Bryce was already helping the next Marine. No arrogance. No intimidation. Just service. Exactly as it should be. She sat alone at a corner table and opened her notebook. Outside, Falcon Ridge Marine Base continued its day. Inside, something important had changed. Not because a general had revealed her rank, not because a staff sergeant had been humiliated, but because a leader had chosen correction over destruction. And because one Marine had finally learned the lesson that every great leader understands. The strongest leaders are not the ones who stand above others. They are the ones willing to serve beside them. And as long as leaders remembered that truth, Falcon Ridge would remain in good hands.